November's election is 60 days away, and early voting is set to kick off in some states in the coming weeks. Polls show a tight race, marking a sea change from what the race was roughly 2 months ago. Vice President Kamala Harris built enough momentum to chip away at the commanding lead former President Trump held before President Biden dropped out of the race. And in just a few days, Trump and Harris will take to the debate stage for the first and possibly only presidential debate this election cycle. The economy, border policy, and abortion access will be among the issues discussed, with both campaigns holding starkly different views on those issues. Will Trump or Harris get a post-debate bounce? Joining me now to discuss is the Hill's congressional reporter, Mychael Schnell, who is here to break down what we can expect to see next week on the campaign trail and here in Washington. Mychael, it's so good to see you. I want to start with that early voting story that has kicked off in North Carolina, with the state beginning to mail out ballots today, and other states are set to follow in the coming weeks. Early and mail-in voting has been a tricky issue for Republicans. We know that President Trump has been skeptical of the practice in the past, but the party, the GOP, has embraced it in recent years. What's been behind that change?
Yeah, Julia, this has been such a swirling road for former President Donald Trump when you talk about his relationship with early voting. He used to be very skeptical of it. He used to oppose it. He used to say that, claim that it was linked to election fraud and that it led to distrust of elections. In fact, after the Iowa caucuses back in January, Trump declared, quote, "We have to get rid of mail-in ballots because once you have mail-in ballots, you have crooked elections." Now, as you mentioned, that has completely changed at this point. Back in April, Trump wrote on his Truth Social account, quote, "Absentee voting, early voting, and election day voting are all good options. Republicans must make a plan, register, and vote." Completely night and day compared to how he used to feel and think about mail-in voting. And really what this has been attributed to in a lot of different outlets is that Republican officials have urged him to embrace this form of voting. We know that a lot of Americans take advantage of early voting and take advantage of mail-in voting. So folks have said that he needs to embrace it. He seems to be doing that now. Will it have an effect at results of the ballot box? We'll just have to see. But I think it just underscores how close this election is and how every vote is really going to matter.
Staying with North Carolina, we know that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. filed a request to remove his name from the state's ballot, but the state's Board of Elections rejected that request last week. A judge will rule whether or not to grant Kennedy's request. But how much of an outcome could this have on battleground North Carolina? I mean, Mychael, it's so ironic that RFK Jr. is the person who sued to get on these ballots, and now he's suing to get off of them.
Yeah, it's been a crazy story watching how RFK has traversed the presidential election and his presidential bid. Look, I don't see this having too much of an impact in a place like North Carolina, just because right now it looks like Trump has a commanding lead. I checked in with Decision Desk HQ's take on the election just before. Trump has a 65% chance of winning the state. Harris with the 35% chance of winning the state. You know, that comes with the caveat that that could absolutely change as we get closer to November's election day. But that's a pretty commanding lead for Trump. But, you know, RFK being on the ballot could take away and peel away some voters who were supportive of RFK, were then going to maybe vote for Trump because RFK had endorsed Trump. They may stick with RFK now, and that could really peel off voters from Trump's support. It could make it more difficult for him to win in the state. So we're going to have to see just A, how sizable RFK Jr.'s support was in that state, and B, whether or not those voters, in light of him staying on the ballot, but with the Trump endorsement, if those voters are going to stick with RFK Jr. or follow his lead and vote for Trump.
So I want to move to next week's presidential debate that's taking place in just a few days. Both Harris and Trump will take the stage on ABC News. And as of now, the Decision Desk HQ forecasting shows Harris has a 55% chance of winning the election. What are both candidates doing to prep for the stage, and what are you watching out for?
Yeah, very different strategies for their debate prep, Julia. Right now, Vice President Kamala Harris is in Pittsburgh, and she is hunkering down doing that debate prep. It's been said that there are folks that former senior advisor to Hillary Clinton, when she was a Secretary of State, is going to be playing Trump during those preparations. Democratic operative Karen Dunn and Harris's former Senate Chief of Staff Rohini Kozloglu are running the debate prep. So she is really hunkering down there in Pittsburgh. She got there today on she got there on Thursday. She's going to be there until the debate on Tuesday, focusing on prep. Trump, on the other hand, has taken a very different, more public-facing strategy. He's at the New York court hearing today to appeal the verdict in his E. Jean Carroll case, the sex abuse case. He's going to have a press conference afterwards. He recently had a town hall in Pennsylvania, delivered remarks in New York, and he's going to be doing a rally in Wisconsin over the weekend. So Trump, his folks have been saying that talking to voters is sort of his form of debate prep, and he's going to have more of a public-facing schedule ahead of that debate. But a lot to look forward to on Tuesday. I'm interested because it's going to be the first time that the two have actually directly met. Vice President Kamala Harris has said that she's never actually met Donald Trump. The only time they've been in the same room was for State of the Union addresses when Harris was in the Senate. So I'm curious to see how they're going to interact with one another, being that they are opponents in this biggest race in the country, but they've never actually met before.
That's so interesting, and it's been quite a while since we've seen handshakes at the past few presidential debates. It's a small thing, but an interesting dynamic to look out for. And another thing to look out for at next week's debates are the economic policies. We know that Vice President Harris has been releasing details of her economic plan, and so has former President Trump. In fact, he spoke this week at the Economic Club of New York and was questioned on what he would do to lower the cost of childcare. Now, many Democrats have mocked Trump over his response, but could we see the cost of childcare becoming a major campaign issue ahead of November's election?
It absolutely could. And I think that considering both Trump and Vance's meandering answers to these questions, which have gotten a lot of criticism and have gotten a lot of flack from Democrats in particular. Congressman Sean Cassidy, he's a Democrat from Illinois, for example, he wrote on X that that Trump's response to that question was, quote, towering stupidity. The people listening know it. The people around him know it. Word salad, not even pretending to have a single coherent idea. Vote for smart people. So considering the fact that both Trump and Vance had these, responses that have come under fire from Democrats, definitely expect Democrats to now make this a key part of the election cycle. And not just for that political reason, but because it is a really important issue, the cost of childcare. A lot of families across the country who would like to spend less money on childcare. It's one of those kitchen table issues that a lot of folks talk about are so important when it comes to elections.
It's also an issue that we've seen Republicans and Democrats come together on, on Capitol Hill in the past. So, we'll see how Republicans at the federal level, Trump and Vance, are able to approach that issue on the campaign trail. So moving on to the Harris campaign, her campaign said it raked in $361 million in August. That's nearly tripling former President Trump's August haul of $130 million. What's behind this latest fundraising spike, or I should say continuing fundraising spike for Harris?
I think it's exactly what you just said, Julia, continuing spike. Let's remember, I believe President Biden dropped out of the race on July 21st, I think the date was, and threw his support behind Kamala Harris. That was at the tail end of the month of July, which means that, yes, there was that massive spike in the immediate 24 hours after and the immediate week after, but there was still time for folks to, A, tune into the news, react, and then decide on their own to then put money into the campaign if they believed in its mission and they believed in Kamala Harris. I had spoken to a Democratic source beforehand who said that they expected fundraising to be even higher in the month of August. That was the month of their convention. Again, it was the time where people were settling with the news of having Vice President Kamala Harris as their nominee. So I think that all those factors have influenced and driven this extreme cash haul for the Harris-Walz campaign.
So RFK Jr., moving back to him, he will be campaigning with Trump over the next 60 days. And, his influence is already being felt on the former president's campaign, and it's really showing. Trump has started to push a new slogan, Make America Healthy Again. And some Democrats and critics are worried that Kennedy could potentially, if Trump is elected, become the Secretary of Health and Human Services. That has not officially been floated, but it's been, I guess, a hypothesis or a theory we've heard floated. He is known as a vaccine skeptic. He holds a controversial stance around medicine. What are the biggest concerns for Democrats, and how much power could he yield if he is nominated and eventually confirmed to hold the position?
Yeah, and you mentioned this is speculation. It was a lot of it was fueled from Nicole Shanahan, who was, of course, RFK Jr.'s running mate. She recently said that she thought RFK Jr. would do, quote, an incredible job at the Department of Health and Human Services if Trump were to win in November. Now, look, I think there's a lot of concern among Democrats about the prospect of RFK Jr. at HHS. You mentioned he has a number of controversial stances. He's courted controversy for pushing debunked theories that vaccines cause autism. He has also spoken about childhood chronic disease, something that he also attributes to vaccinations. So he's sort of had these controversial views on a lot of different areas in medicine. So I think that is concerning a lot of Democrats. But, of course, this is all a big if. Whether or not that comes to fruition, we'll just have to see what ends up happening. But, definitely significant and worth discussing after RFK Jr. suspended his campaign and endorsed Donald Trump.
Right. So moving on to the White House and President Biden, the White House announced that Biden will sign the Good Jobs executive order while in Michigan today. What's included in that executive order, and what else is Biden looking to accomplish before leaving office?
Yeah, I don't think it should go unnoticed that Biden is going to Michigan, one of the key swing states and battleground states in this election, to roll out this Good Jobs executive order. Essentially, what it's intended to do is to ensure federal agencies are promoting, backing strong labor standards, including workplace safety, high wages, and different ways to join a union. It's also going to direct agencies to adopt voluntary union recognition and also neutrality when it comes to union organizing. It's also going to call for prioritizing equal pay and pay transparency. And it's also going to back workforce development and support workplace safety. So a lot of things that are important to workers, especially in, again, I mentioned the state of Michigan. We're going to be hearing a lot about the Wolverine state as we get closer to November. It is one of those key battleground states. So I think it's definitely very significant that Biden is going there to roll out this executive order.
Yeah, certainly no coincidence there. So I want to move to the Senate race in Florida. New polling shows a neck-and-neck race between Republican Senator Rick Scott and former Democratic Congresswoman Debbie McCarcel-Powell. Scott is leading 46 to 45% among likely voters. We should note that other polls show Scott leading 4 to 5 points ahead of McCarcel-Powell. Republicans have gained major ground in recent years in Florida, essentially turning the state red. But should Scott and other Republicans be worried by these numbers showing a narrowing race?
I think so. I mean, look, Rick Scott is a pretty strong incumbent. He's been in the Senate for years now. And the fact that the Democratic challenger has gotten this close to Scott in the polls, I think is fascinating. The numbers definitely caught my eye. I think it's worth noting, though, that I believe it was about 9% of voters said that they were still undecided. So still plenty of people who may be on the fence, but could easily tip this election in one way or another. But absolutely, it's fascinating. Florida has been one of those key, interesting states that has a bit of a checkered political history, but has obviously been trending red in recent years. Something that for a Democrat to win a Senate seat, that would say a lot about the trajectory of Florida. And I think it would really rev up a lot of Florida Democrats who like to say that their state is a battleground state and a purple state, even though it's obviously trended red in recent years.
One Democratic operative told me earlier this week that it's not a swing state, but it's certainly in that category of states that look in on the swing states, maybe one level below. So we'll see if the margins are narrower in November. But I want to stick with Florida. And one of the reasons why Democrats have increased their presence in the state, is essentially because they're looking to tie Republicans in the state to the state's 6-week abortion ban signed into law by Governor Ron DeSantis last year. But new polling shows that 55% of likely Florida voters would vote yes on a ballot measure that would enshrine abortion rights into the state's constitution. Now, it's important to note that 60% of yes voters are needed to pass the amendment. Could this issue drive Democratic turnout in the state, Michael?
Absolutely. And I can tell you that Democrats are planning to drive turnout on this issue of abortion rights. I wrote a story on this a few weeks ago, spoke to a number of House Democrats who told me that they believe that the growing number of abortion ballot initiatives that are going to be voted on at the ballot box come November, they believe that's going to drive turnout because there may be some voters who are disenchanted by the two presidential candidates before them. They may be not too excited about the slate of House and Senate candidates before them, but they're voters who want to protect the women's reproductive right to choose, women's reproductive rights and a woman's right to choose. And a lot of House Democrats believe that that will get folks out of their houses and to ballot boxes to vote for that ballot initiative. And then when they're there, they will likely vote up and down Democrat because they're voting on the single issue of abortion rights. Now, it's a big gamble and it's a big bet, and whether or not that turns out to be the case, will remains to be seen. But Democrats are looking back on 2022 and the better than expected returns that they had because of the lingering anger over the decision that overturned Roe v. Wade. They're hoping that those dynamics recreate themselves this year with whether it's Florida's 6-week abortion ban, whether it's other IVF rulings that have happened in states across the country. They're hoping that that will motivate voters to head to the ballot box and in turn push out Democratic wins.
Want to move to another red state. Over in Texas, Republican Congressman Tony Gonzalez said his party is on track to lose the House in November. Gonzalez narrowly won his primary earlier this year after facing pressure from inside of his own party's right flank. Decision Desk HQ forecasting shows Republicans have a 56% chance of winning the House. But where are their biggest vulnerabilities in this November election cycle?
Yeah, it's going to be those toss-up states, those purple states. For Republicans specifically, it's going to be some states that there are right now 17 districts that President Biden won back in 2020 that are currently represented by Republicans. Those are going to be Democrats' largest pickup opportunities, the districts that they are really zeroing in on. But look, I think it's fascinating to see how the House will turn out in November. It really is a toss-up right now, and it's been a really interesting, crazy year up on Capitol Hill. The past year and a half, we had the elongated election of Speaker Kevin McCarthy and then the downfall of Kevin McCarthy. Of course, the battle over the debt limit, a few potential shutdown scares. So there's been a lot of drama this past year in Congress. What a lot of Democrats have said is that they do not want, that voters are not going to want to recreate that chaos and that drama in the next Congress. Republicans have pushed back by saying that they don't want to put Democrats in charge because they're concerned about the economy, the situation at the southern border, and other matters. So it's going to be really fascinating to see how the House shakes out. And of course, this is so important because whoever wins the presidency is going to want to get as close to uniform control of Congress as possible to get things done. So really, the House is very important right now.
Yeah, those first 2 years going from a presidential election to a midterm election, very important for any president. Mychael Schnell, as always, thank you so much for covering all of this ground for us.
Thanks, Julia.
The suspect in the school shooting at Appalachia High School in Georgia made his first appearance in court this morning. The shooter, identified as 14-year-old Colt Gray, is accused of killing 4 people. He was charged Thursday with 4 counts of felony murder, 1 count for each death. Gray is accused of using a semi-automatic assault-style rifle to kill 2 students and 2 teachers and injuring 9 others. Gray's father, Colin Gray, quote, knowingly allowed his son to have the weapon. He has been charged with 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter, 2 counts of second-degree murder, and 8 counts of cruelty to children. The U.S. added 142,000 jobs in August, easing fears of wider economic decline as the labor market cools. That data, according to the Labor Department, which also reported the unemployment rate ticked down to 4.2%. The August job gain fell short of economists' predictions of 161,000 jobs and was highly anticipated as the Federal Reserve prepares to cut interest rates. Fed Chair Jerome Powell said last month that the time has come for policy to adjust after holding rates at a 23-year high of 5.25% to 5.5% since last July. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is visiting Haiti, showing support for the country as it struggles with political upheaval and gang violence. Blinken is the highest-ranking political official to visit the country since 2015, announcing $45 million in humanitarian aid for the country. Haiti is currently in the midst of an experimental transition to democracy, and Blinken has played a pivotal role in the creation of the country's 7-member Transitional Presidential Council. Just one day before Blinken's visit, Haiti issued a state of emergency for the entire country amid ongoing security threats related to gang violence. The violence marks the largest internal crime-driven displacement crisis in the world, according to the UN, with over 578,000 people forced from their homes. Trust in the government's ability to ensure food safety has hit a record low, that according to a new Gallup poll. Results found that 57% of respondents have fair amount or a great deal of confidence in the government's ability to keep the food supply safe, marking an 11-point fall from 2019. 28% said they have little confidence and 14% said they had none at all. The results mark a political divide, with Republicans and independents being less likely to have trust in the government's ability to keep the food supply safe. And that's it for today's Daily Debrief. I'm Julia Manchester. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hill's YouTube channel. And come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.